everyone, my name is Tabitha Lygard and I am a conflict management strategist. I help leaders of diverse teams manage conflict so that they can close the gap between issues and outcomes and create peaceful and profitable workplaces. Our topic today is building bridges, navigating cultural differences in communication. So sit back, relax, and share this with a bestie so that someone else can benefit from what you're about to hear. I was born in Guyana in South America. And before moving to the US, I've lived in Barbados, Trinidad, St. Kitts and Nevis, the Bahamas, and the Cayman Islands. I call myself a culture bridger. And what that means is someone who is able to facilitate communication and understanding between individuals from different groups or different cultures. Someone who can recognize and appreciate cultural differences, and someone who can adapt their communication style to accommodate different cultural backgrounds. As culture bridgers, we find different ways of sharing information across different teams, in different groups, all for the purpose of productive collaboration. Today, we're going to talk about how effective communication is important in cross-cultural communication or context. Here's my story on why this is important. Recently, twice in meetings, I used terms that would have been well known in the culture that I am from, but they did not translate into the culture that I was in. So the terms that I used would be well known in my country of birth, in the society where I'm from. However, the meetings that I were in took place in my adopted country. So the words that I used became a distraction. Instead of being able to communicate on the point that we were taking care of, I needed to take a break and take a step back, explain what I meant, and the person who was listening needed to stop, take their focus from the thing that we were working on, and delve into what I was saying to try to understand the context. I decided to stop halfway and I said, you know what? Let me just go forward. And what I did was divert from what I was trying to explain, get back to the topic at hand, and discuss it using terms that were familiar to the hearer. Because the meeting was professional, I didn't think that it was appropriate to go too much into the context. And this is why it is so important to understand how cultural differences affect how we communicate. There are some very key differences in communication, especially when it is done across intercultural groups. There is high context and low context communication. There is direct and indirect communication, and there is individualistic and collectivistic communication. These differences impact how we interpret things and how we share information across conversations. For example, high context communication relates to communication where a lot of the meaning is conveyed and implied through nonverbal cues, through shared context, and shared cultural knowledge. So people who communicate in this matter, they rely on a common understanding. So if I go home to my country of birth, we are going to communicate in the context of the language which we speak, which is English, but also in Creolese, which is the Guyanese derivative of that English. In that circumstance, our communication is high context communication because it all depends on the context of the thing we are talking about, the context of our shared culture, the context of the shared language of Creolese, our shared experiences, and the things we grew up around. However, in low context communication, a lot of the meaning is conveyed explicitly through words rather than nonverbal cues or context. And so there is a challenge in communication in the workplace when there is conflict because someone needs to code switch to be able to be understood. Remember the situation where I used the term from my country of birth in a professional meeting in the USA? That was because I was, in that instance and on that day, totally exhausted. And my tiredness, my exhaustion affected my code switching capability. And it led to me using inadvertently a context from another culture in the culture that I was in. Now, I want to highlight some of the common challenges and pitfalls that come from code switching, because if we are code switching and we are not necessarily focused and alert, we can tend to use outdated terms, terms that are not appropriate for the arena that we are in. And by doing that, we can come across as not being authentic or not being respectful of the culture that we're in or the group that we're working with. So here's the solution to navigate cultural differences in communication. And I'm going to give a solution for both the person who is bridging cultures and for the listener. For the culture bridger, who's someone like me, one of the solutions is to be aware of our own cultural biases and assumptions. And when we're speaking, try to use plain language that is easy to understand and that can translate across the different cultures instead of using jargon or slang. And also, when we're communicating in the workplace, we want to be open to feedback and we want to be open to other people's views of how they receive what we are saying and what we're trying to convey. As a listener, one of the strategies you can use to understand communication in a cross-cultural context is to ask clarifying questions. So if something is said that you don't necessarily understand, again, guard those assumptions and ask a few questions, because by doing that, you might be able to understand better and you may get even more information about the culture that you're observing. Also, listen actively and seek to understand the person's perspective. You may want to even think about how you can shelve your own perspective for a minute and just lean into what is being communicated so that you understand what is being said and you understand something else about the culture, which would actually make the project that you're working on and the collaboration an even richer experience than the one you necessarily would have had if you were not getting a little bit of another culture while you were working and collaborating. And for both the culture bridger and the listener, it's always good to advocate for flexibility and adaptability in communication so that it's easier to promote intercultural understanding in the workplace. Thank you so much for tuning in and for giving me the opportunity to share insights and to share a little bit of my experience. Now, if you or someone you know is experiencing challenges in cross-cultural communication and would like some support, the invitation is to reach out to us at hello@marshallduke.llc.com, and we'll be happy to facilitate a discussion or to talk with you and help you to be able to communicate across cultures in your workplace, which is going to lead to a better work environment, a more cohesive and collaborative approach, and a peaceful, productive, and profitable workplace. See you in the next video.